You ever get one of those gifts as a kid that felt like nobody ever heard of it before? One birthday I got an action figure from the show Exo Squad. Phaeton here. I had never seen the show and still haven't, but I actually dug the gift. It looked like Magitek armor from Final Fantasy VI. It even had a video game. Who knew? While Exo Squad is a bad example, we had less IP proliferation in the 80s and 90s, believe it or not. Take these little Germs figurines by Worlds of Wonder. I had a few. I remember loving these things. They didn't do anything, they didn't have a show or a comic or a video game, they just came in a test tube and were gross and brightly colored. Very much my jam. I gave them little personalities and played with them right alongside my Legos and Ninja Turtles. They sparked the imagination. Maybe that's why I like esoteric fighting game characters so much. We spend such a brief time with them and there's only so much information on them. It really calls upon our imaginations to fill in the gaps, and our enthusiasm to keep them alive. Maybe that's why this show exists. Today's subject came from one of those weird gifts. I plunged dozens of dollars worth of quarters into Street Fighter II's arcade machines and had a home copy of Turbo on my SNES, but the franchise fell out of my periphery around 1995. I didn't pick up on the Alpha series or Street Fighter III until closer to the 7th generation's big release that brought us into the fighting game renaissance we enjoy today. Except that my stepbrother gave me a PlayStation 2 title for some holiday or another that included some unique characters alongside series staples Ryu and Zangief. Little did I know about the related 1998 title or the exciting arrival waiting for me in 2018.
Fighting Layer!
I'm Eric J. Chucky, and welcome to Violent Profiles, where we discuss obscure fighting games and the rosters that define them. If you could close the 20-year gap between the like button and the subscribe, that would be cool. Comments also tickle the algorithm's fancy, and sharing the video with your friends is the best way to make sure more eyes land on my little show. A lot of y'all say it's criminal I don't have more views, and I agree. Let's fix that together. Our story begins when ARIKA was chosen to shepherd Street Fighter into polygonal graphics with the Street Fighter EX series, which had 6 iterations between 3 main titles, and included a bunch of original ARIKA characters. It was Street Fighter EX3 I had my hot little hands on around the year 2000, and while it wasn't my favorite game by any stretch, it left an impression. So much so that when I made Season 0 of this very series, available exclusively on my Patreon at the $5 tier, the very first episode was about my favorite obscure Street Fighter characters, and out of the 8 fighters I described, fully 3 of them were from Street Fighter EX3. Much to my surprise while working on that episode, it was announced that the ARIKA characters would make a return in Fighting EX Layer, which dropped the next year in 2018, and I got to see some of my old favorites again. Unbeknownst to me, there was also a standalone non-Street Fighter arcade title back in 1998 when EX2 dropped called Fighting Layer, which was published by Namco. There's a lot to cover today as we're examining 2 full rosters and a few leftovers from the EX series, so I'm going to keep mechanics talk light. Suffice it to say that all of these games are good. Maybe even great sometimes, certainly among the upper echelons of games we've featured on this channel so far. And while they can cite certain achievements, like EX being the first Street Fighter to use 3D models, they aren't worth nitpicking over from a mechanical standpoint, especially not on a show where we focus on character bios over gameplay anyhow. Being as Fighting Layer's character details are so tragically light, we'll start there. The bios for all the games are thin, and the endings usually supply even less. Arcade titles didn't have manuals like home releases used to. Much of the dialogue is in Japanese or limited to light fight sounds. Hell, even the eye catch is just still images with exotic English terms for fighting game moves like just hit and super combination laid over them. We didn't always need those details back in the day. Give us 8 or so weirdos to bash buttons about and we were happy.
I'm so happy, darling.
I as well. Are you happy, Jeeves?
Yes, sir. Quite.
Then we're all happy!
So we'll be working off of information sourced by ARIKA's own Japanese website with help from Google Lens, as well as the info supplied by the fine folks who contribute to the Street Fighter Wikia. We'll be skipping Alan Snyder and Blair Dame for now, as even though they are both in the game, their final appearances are in the most recent title, Fighting EX Layer, and it makes more sense to cover their entire stories when they conclude. So let's start with the roster with the most fighting baseball-esque names I've ever heard. Vold Ignitio can teleport, possibly shapeshift, has super speed, and might be a vampire. Or maybe he just really likes cats? I very nearly forgot to tell you about his crotch-mounted machine gun. You're welcome. He's the final boss of the conflict, which takes place on South Island. Vold's not unlockable via normal play and doesn't have a bio on the site, so despite ostensibly being the driving force behind the game, not much is known about him. I know a lot of game bios say that, but today I mean that in real life. When you defeat him, he often turns into a weird crystal with a double helix inside it, and his death causes the arena to begin collapsing, prompting your chosen fighter's hasty retreat, most of the time. I'm genuinely not sure if I'm pronouncing the next guy's name right. It looks like Jigjid Bartol, but the announcer says so who knows. He wears a sparkly skirt over top his hammer pants and has the kind of face one usually only sees in memes. His snippet on the website implies he's meant to be a hero for his countrymen of the grasslands, and his fighting style seems to have a lot of sumo influence, though he's not entirely that. It's pretty unique. I kinda dig it. No-nonsense sub-boss Preston Ajax fights with a very straightforward military style like you'd see with Street Fighter's Guile or Tekken's Brian Fury. This character was a timed release in arcades, and he uses a monowire to trip and garrote his enemies, and might be some kind of cyborg or zombie, or both. He has recurring nightmares of the war that took his body from him, and in his backstory makes conversation with a little brother who doesn't talk back and isn't actually there. While most characters flee from the collapsing boss arena, Preston just stares to the sky and accepts his fate of being smushed by a giant rock. Meet George Jensen. He's not Bruce Lee. Ignore the tracksuit. And his hair. George seems to be some kind of officer of the law, unhappy about his current assignment on South Island. Still, he figures he better wrap up his investigation quickly, since it's the Jensen family motto not to spend more than 3 days in a place that isn't bathed in neon lights and exhaust fumes. The Ryu of this game, Tetsuo Kato, is a martial arts master on a journey to be considered the best and the strongest. He appears to be using some kind of karate, his hair is on the cutting edge of late 90s fashion, and the blue pattern on his gi is actually a nice way to break up the otherwise white outfit. I approve. Exodus is a pro wrestler who uses steel chairs, fire breath, and even Atsushi Onita's Kama as used by his Great Nita persona. He's beloved by the fans, owing in no small part to his incredibly stylish ring gear, and has a grudge against his predecessor who was regarded as one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. That legendary wrestler is Clemens Kleiber, another time-release character who fights with a bit more of a strong-style approach to his assault. He's dressed like it's still the 80s, by which I mean plain trunks and an eye patch, not whatever gloriousness was going on with Jason Momoa in the Minecraft movie. When Clemens finishes the fight, instead of leaving the base, he just stands there, cackling and doing jazz hands after Vold gets crushed by a giant peanut. Janice Luciani is a Juri Han type without the, She spends the fight giggling gleefully while slicing and skewering her opponent with knives. She's obsessed with blood and seems to seek nothing more than the freedom of wanton violence. I would have had a crush on her if I played this game back in the day. I was not mentally well as a teen. Janice also has a gun. Who gave her that? That's not fair. When you beat the game with her, she uses a bazooka to destroy the base instead of it just being tied to Vold's life force or whatever. Our next fighter is Shangfeng Wang, an agile thief who is led to the island by a fortune teller who promises him wealth beyond his imagination. His kung fu is quite strong, with a very speedy, fluid style. Probably one of my favorites on the roster. I like his Aladdin meets street tough vibe. Taekwondo fighter Hong Gilson discovers a book in a storehouse where he used to spend his childhood that tells him of South Island, where many of his ancestors sought power but never returned. Cocky and brutal, Hong makes for the island, certain he'll claim the glory his lineage has thus far failed to obtain. Joe Fendi lives in the nexus between the boxer from Street Fighter and Steve Fox, blending heavy hits with smooth bobbing and weaving, and topping it all off with incredible style. He might just be my favorite boxer in fighting games. Even his corner man is cool. Look, he gives him supportive hugs between rounds. You gotta hug the homies. Unfortunately, he was kicked out of the circuit for being blind in one eye. The sunglasses apparently do something to help him see, as when he gets conked on the head by falling debris in the ending, instead of Joe fleeing the base, we see his corner man charging in to save him. You gotta save the homies. The announcer calls the next fighter Lang Infa, so that's what we're going with. Sometimes announcers are wrong,
Barlog!
but I'm gonna take this one at his word. He seems cool.
Are you right? Are you ready?
Anyhow, Lang grew up on stories of great heroes fighting giant serpents and dragons on the mysterious South Island. Though she never believed they could be true, when the opportunity to see these strange lands for herself came, she couldn't help but indulge. I can't say I'm fond of her color palette, but I dig the hair. Her fighting style reminds me of Bajie Quan. Sessyu Tsukikage is a frickin' ninja. He's got a sick Sarigama, Shuriken, a little Tanto. Did I mention these games are actually pretty wicked? Because they are. You may assume Sessyu is a badass assassin, and he is. His backstory sees him killing a friend, quipping a more poetic version of nothing personal, it's just business. Sessyu's ending is the only one in which Vold definitely does not die. If his skills are available to the highest bidder, does that mean he's in Vold's employ? Or perhaps he was only hired to retrieve the item Vold leaves behind? Mysterious. Finally, we come to Capriccio, who is this. He appears to be a human being in a strange thong and headdress. I'm not sure what those things on his back are, though I suppose they might be some sort of fungus. I can't even really discern much from his backstory because it's written in Japanese so broken that the translator keeps trying to tell me one of Capriccio's fellows wants to shave his butt off. I think his people live in a cold cave full of glowing moss somewhere, and Capriccio suddenly realizes they deserve more out of life. In his ending, Capriccio turns Vold into a giant mushroom, does a victory dance to make it grow, and then eats it. And then he leaves. The base isn't even falling apart, he's just done. He's done what he came here to do, and I guess he's leaving now. Please don't mistake my confusion for derision, this is clearly the best character on the roster. Fighting Layer also has a number of bizarre challenges that eventually become time-release playables. A falcon, a knight, a cooler version of that knight, a tiger, and a shark. Believe it or not, they don't have backstories on the website. I guess these guys will just have to remain a mystery. Now, if this were a normal episode of Violent Profiles, that's where you'd hear the outro music and I'd start to talk about what's coming next month. Not today. Exempting the rest of the roster for the same reason we did Alan and Blair in Fighting Layer, the only characters exclusive to the first 3 Street Fighter EX games, specifically from the Plus and Plus Alpha versions, are Cycloid Gamma and Cycloid Beta, living weapons that can mimic the fighting styles of other warriors. Gamma looks like a wireframe.
That's the joke.
It was built by fellow roster member Pullum Perna's father, Bulba, who had intended to use it to bring down a large criminal organization. He probably meant Shadaloo, it's almost always Shadaloo in Street Fighter. When Bulba was placed under house arrest, Shadaloo's tech department finished Gamma against his will and now employs it to their nefarious ends. Sometimes Gamma sneaks out of Shadaloo's clutches to learn new fighting techniques. On one such excursion, it discovered a version of itself with textures, Cycloid Beta. Its origin is unknown, though its programming is expressed as neutralize moving target. It's perhaps interesting to note these fighters' similarities to the copy robots in Street Fighter VI produced by a company called CERN, which is believed to be comprised of SIN remnants, which is to say the Shadaloo Intimidation Network. Not to mention genetically engineered gender fluid replacement body for M. Bison Seth, former CEO of SIN. Street Fighter EX3 brings us a similar copy fighter called Ace, a secret agent sent by the Prime Minister of his country to infiltrate Shadaloo's base and gather data on their secret weapon. He apparently does this through a device implanted in his spine, which analyzes cards that hold data on said fighting skills and loads him up with a slick new moveset. Should Ace find victory, he earns praise from his boss and is quickly shuffled to his next assignment. Ace is also unique in that you have some degree of customization over his moves, as the cards are a meta aspect in addition to an in-universe construct that you can purchase to afford him additional techniques. Neat! But now we get to the meat of this episode, the roster of Fighting EX Layer and their history through the rest of the games we've covered. Let's start with the pair that have been waiting the longest. First up is Alan Snyder, a proud American fighter. You might think that this is far too normal a name for our dear ARIKA, and you'd be right. His working name was Cashew Snyder. Alan was considered the greatest living karate master in the United States until he crossed paths with the then-rookie Ken Masters, who soundly defeated him. Ken consoled Alan by calling him a frog in a well, an Eastern metaphor meaning that Alan's worldview is narrow, and he was only the best within that perspective. Alan is kind of stupid, so he thought Ken meant he had awesome leg strength like a frog, and it redoubled his passion for training, developing techniques based on the Street Fighter's own Shotokan karate, so that he could fully leap out of the well and become the biggest frog in the world. Since there is no Ken Masters in Fighting EX Layer, Alan instead focuses his ire on fellow ARIKA character Garuda, whose energy refuses to react to him. Once defeated, he chants USA like Hacksaw Jim Duggan. You know, now that I'm looking at them both side by side, nah, couldn't be. Blair Dame is the daughter of a wealthy European family with all the status and culture that implies. Depending on who you ask, she pursues mixed martial arts, Savate is mentioned specifically as one of them, as well as shoot boxing, but you can see some Krav Maga influence in there as well, either as a part of her overall upper crust physical education, or because she wants to use it to defend her family in the case of bad guys coming after them. Her family's supportive of these endeavors, but worry about her, so they hire a bodyguard and fellow roster member Crackerjack and insist she take her butler Sebastian with her. During her travels, she develops feelings for Jack, and in Fighting EX Layer, she employs Volcano Rosso to help track him down after he goes missing, then proposes he become her husband before hastily correcting herself to butler. Blair is part of a worldwide young ladies club with Pullum Purna. One of the post-launch free DLC characters, Pullum first showed up way back in the first Street Fighter EX. A posh, spoiled Saudi princess who bases her fighting style on traditional dances from her homeland. As we mentioned before, her father ended up press-ganged into working for Shadaloo, and her grandfather became catatonic after reading a book with the word Shadaloo on the cover. She has vowed revenge, but over the course of 5 games, she loses interest in that. By the time Fighting EX Layer rolls around, she's now in charge of her country, but frequently takes time away from her duties to pursue leads on her father's disappearance. By the end of the game, she joins forces with her old bodyguard to successfully battle the evil entity Garuda. Who is this bodyguard? Why, that would be Darren Meister. This professional wrestler from India is a longtime friend of Zangief, and once formed a twosome with him called Ultimate Medio Tag Team. His main goals seem to be protecting Pullum and proving himself as the strongest wrestler with his Indra Bridge finishing maneuver. After a brief foray into training the next generation of grapplers, the god Indra speaks to Darren in a dream, warning him of the wicked Garuda who needs purification. Darren battles Garuda once and is left defeated, but crawls back from the brink of death and tracks down Garuda again. Beat Fighting EX Layer with him, and he successfully purifies Garuda with his Indra Bridge. I love that he wears the title belt over his shoulder during fights. That's spectacular. Speaking of bodyguards, I mentioned Cracker Jack earlier as Blair Dame's personal security. He got his name from being a renowned bouncer and member of the Crackers Protection Service in Las Vegas before eventually leaving to pursue a life of freedom. Unfortunately, he became targeted by a secret organization, so he began working for the Dame family as cover. By fighting EX Layer, this has also led him to leave his service to Blair as the organization began getting too close. Pursued by a man he believed to be a member of the organization, Jack ends his story fighting Volcano Rosso, only to discover he's a detective working for Blair now. We should actually talk about free DLC fighter Volcano Rosso before going any further. A dandy Italian with impeccable hair whose base of operations is located somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea, once a member of the mysterious organization that was trying to control Europe and chase down Jack, when Volcano's lover was killed by a traitorous fellow member, his heart burned only with a fire for revenge. He finds it, but what is it we say around here about revenge?
An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind.
This leads him back to his base where he stays despondent until he leaves the organization to become a detective, where Blair finds him to track down Jack. If you put both men's endings together, it turns out that Volcano is Jack's brother somehow, and refers to their life together as youths before Jack sends him flying with a punch and leaves him to take care of Blair in his stead. Yes, even if you beat the game with Volcano, he gets Guy Gardnered by Jack in his ending. We've mentioned Garuda a few times now, let's dive into his backstory, especially since he's the catalyst for a lot of what happens in fighting EX Layer. Once a nobleman who protected his village from an undescribed threat, his spirit was overtaken by dark forces unleashed through Akuma and Evil Ryu's Satsui no Hado. This power feeds on negative emotions, magnifying his strength against those who wish to become stronger, hence why Alan was so offended when Garuda didn't react to him, and burning with hatred against those who hold a grudge. This manifests in a flaming aura and feather-like blades that pop out of his body to pierce his foes. In fighting EX Layer, we discover Garuda was sealed away within Hayate, a swordsman from Street Fighter EX2. This was apparently going well enough to contain the darkness for a while, but Hayate couldn't bear it forever, and now the dark spirit puppets around Hayate's body. It's not terribly clear whether Hayate and Garuda were meant to be one and the same from the start. Hayate only appears in EX2 and has a backstory with strong similarity to the man who would become Garuda. A swordsman from the village of Kukunochi and a descendant of the man who sealed away the beast Orochi is the one called upon to save the village when Orochi re-emerges and kidnaps the local shrine maid. His Japanese EX2 Plus ending is brief, describing a cold wind shaking Hayate's body and reminding him of his father. He says, "If I don't do it, then fades into darkness." This might be implying that he seeks to contain Garuda just as his father once sealed away Orochi, or it might just be referring to Orochi itself and the story established in EX2. So if Hayate didn't return after EX2, why didn't I mention him before Ace? Well, firstly because he might be Garuda, and secondly because fighting EX Layer has Hayate Kamite, his descendant and the only new character on the EX Layer roster. He mostly has the same moveset, is the new guardian deity of his village, and is caught up in the same trouble. Despite trying to live a normal life as a university student, he eventually recognizes his calling to seal away Garuda, which, if you beat the game, he does. Hooray for the Hayates! Let's take a little break from the heavily integrated characters for a moment and talk about one of my favorites, Doctrine Dark. This German psychopath wields knives, mines, and a monowire like a combination between Janice Luciani and Preston Ajax. Real name Holger, Doctrine Dark once served under Guile as part of a special tactical recon unit, during which time he got in a scuffle with Rolento that escalated until both sides were left with heavy casualties. Dark was the only member of his unit to survive, but it left him physically and psychologically ravaged. He needs that breathing apparatus on his face, you see. It's not just because it looks super badass. Dark blamed Guile for being too obsessed with Bison to ensure the safety of his own men, and of course Rolento for the conflict itself, and has vowed to hunt both men down. Fighting EX Layer suggests it's Garuda's corrupting influence that deepened his psychosis and left him as the shattered, dangerous killer he is today. A similarly tragic figure, Shadowgeist was once a normal man living under a harsh dictatorship in an undisclosed country. His wife was murdered by the government and his daughter went missing after being falsely accused of conspiring against the state. So the man who would become Geist decides to upgrade his body with cybernetics and be a costumed vigilante. But don't mistake this dude for a moral figure like Batman or Spider-Man. He kills those whose injustice he battles. His dark duty causes a war within Geist as he reckons with the deeds he must do and fears the darkness that swells within him. A few of Geist's endings see him dying or nearly dying, self-destructing to end a fiend's reign of terror. In fighting EX Layer, he finally confronts his long-lost daughter and recognizes the man he was has been dead for 20 years.
Ooh, chilling.
It's not super clear whether he means this literally or figuratively. Arika's brief story pieces leave a lot to be desired. That daughter is free DLC fighter Sharon, real name Saren. She only discovers this in fighting EX Layer, where it seems she's found some closure and gives up on her former life, instead choosing to stand beside her lover. Having been taken from her parents at an extremely young age, which makes those seditious accusations against her even more bafflingly false, Sharon was sent to live at a monastery where she was raised as a nun. Somehow,
somehow.
She began living a double life as an agent for a secret intelligence organization tasked with killing a man who bore the same rose tattoo as she did. She ultimately failed and her actions were exposed, leading her to be exiled by both the nuns and the organization she worked for, stuck in house arrest for over a month. Over a month of house arrest for attempted murder? What a brave young woman. However did she survive such grueling torture? ARIKA's stories in general suffer from a lack of nouns. I understand why you wouldn't want to name the oppressive country Shadowgeist is from, for example, but you are just allowed to make something up. There are plenty of properties that largely take place in the real world but have fictitious countries to serve as analogs without offending folks like the MCU Sokovia or DC's Bialia. There's also seemingly 3 or 4 organizations floating around that have no defined name. Was the group stalking Crackerjack that Volcano Rosso used to be a part of Shadaloo? If not, why not give them a name? What about Sharon's intelligence agency? I can understand why they altered things for Fighting EX Layer with it not being a Capcom title anymore, but these nouns were absent in the Street Fighter games as well. Sharon suffers the most from this. Why did she have a rose tattoo if she was a nun? Did she have it before she was ripped away from her father? Who tattoos a child? Who is the lover she now stands beside in Fighting EX Layer? Is it the man with the rose tattoo she was chasing? I guess it says something about her character that she finally learns who her father was and ostensibly what happened to her mother, as well as her birth name, but accepts that part of her life is lost and chooses to embrace who she is today. But it's not even delivered half as well as the other stories in these games. Our final free DLC fighter is Aria, a blissfully simple character. Daughter of a famous inventor with a passion for martial arts and cutting-edge technology, her father insists she use his high-tech upgrades to help protect her in her fights, most notably a pair of rocket skates and the Cancer Arm, likely named for the crab and not the horrible disease. This works for Aria as she tinkers with and upgrades these items between battles. Aria's a little silly, living up to the cute mad scientist trope and making self-aware jokes about her apparently questionable fashion sense. Nothing too deep, but sometimes it's nice to have a simple, fun character instead of a convoluted, tragic one. Speaking of convoluted tragedy, let's dig into the Mizugami family. One of my favorite characters in this series is Kairi, an amnesiac practitioner of his family's ancient jujutsu, which very closely resembles Ansatsuken. On a stormy night, either while sailing or on a cliffside, Kairi was thrown into the ocean during a battle with his sister, Hokuto. She's in the game as paid DLC, but she's like $1, so who actually cares? Kairi washed up on shore, hair white from the trauma and covered in scars from dragging his nearly unconscious body through the rocks on the beach. The only thing he could remember was Hokuto's parting comment, "You must challenge your limits." He was convinced this was the path to uncover his lost memory and continued to fight and grow in strength, following the way of the Shura. This slowly causes him to lose himself to the darkness within, a power that grows so strong that it is implied to be what releases Garuda from Hayate's seal and kicks off the events of Fighting EX Layer. Hokuto, meanwhile, was conceived of a tryst between a woman of the head Mizugami house and a man from a branch family. Entrusted to be the head of her house at an early age, Hokuto was raised as Kairi's sister to help keep the circumstances of her birth a secret. Those who knew sought to manipulate Hokuto, placing a seal of blood upon her that would activate when she had the opportunity to kill Kairi. The manifestation began using her secret birth name Shirase, though she's just called Bloody Hokuto in the Street Fighter EX series, referencing the seal on her forehead. Shirase was nearly successful at killing Kairi by throwing him into the sea, but since then the two have clashed as they grew in power, Kairi seemingly on the verge of remembering who he was, who his sister was, and resolving their family curse. You following so far? Here's where things get really convoluted. In the Street Fighter EX series, there's a character called Nanase, the younger sister of Hokuto and Kairi. Desperate to see her siblings stop their fighting and turn away from a path of darkness, she follows them into battle. In a number of her endings through that series, she sees various degrees of success, most especially in the tag endings for Street Fighter EX3. Now Fighting EX Layer drops and there's a character named Sanane Suzuki. Somewhere between EX3 and Fighting EX Layer, Shirase erased Nanase's memories to protect her from the war that continues to rage between her siblings. Sanane goes to university where she finds unexpected skill and clarity while practicing Bojutsu, until she's defeated by fellow university athlete Hayate Kamite, who breaks the seal upon her, revealing she isn't Nanase or Sanane, but a daughter of one of the Mizugami branch families who Shirase implanted with her sister's memories. You might be asking why she did that, I'm not really sure. Her mind full of conflicting memories, Sanane blames Hayate for her state and comes to despise him. The question remains, what happened to the real Nanase? Well, that's the DLC version of Hokuto, her mind manipulated by Shirase into killing the bloodthirsty assassin she'd become to end the curse. In doing so, Nanase and Kairi both regain their memories and recognize one another, and the family is whole once again. I don't want to end on such a complicated note, so let's finish this list of original ARIKA characters with my personal favorite, Skullomania. Disgraced salesman Saburo Nishikoyama was forced by his company to act in a hero show. Donning the costume awoke something in Saburo, and from that day forward he would wear a skeleton suit and a red scarf, fighting evil as Skullomania. An over-the-top crusader for justice, it's hard to tell the difference between when Scalo is actually standing toe-to-toe with his enemies or just daydreaming about wild situations and impossible odds for him to overcome. Either way, it's working out for his alter ego. His job promoted him to salaryman, and his family lives comfortably in their neighborhood. Skullomania is something of a mascot for ARIKA, appearing in several other games, including Fighter Maker and as a gender-swapped version in SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy.
Look at me, I've got girl boobs.
No matter where he appears, the dramatic, acrobatic hero will always have a place in my heart. Speaking of gender swap participants in SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy, we arrive at the final Fighting EX Layer character, a guest combatant you can earn by forking over $5 of your hard-earned money. Terry Bogard. You know, from Smash Brothers.
Hey, cover!
All joking aside, we won't be talking about Terry here, he's too popular. If I ever cover Fatal Fury or King of Fighters, we can discuss his storied history then. So, what was ARIKA doing between EX3 and Fighting EX Layer? What have they done in the time since? Well, they mostly work with Namco and Nintendo on polishing up titles old and new, including one of my favorite little time wasters of the last decade, Mario 35. They also make the Endless Ocean series, if you like looking at fish or listening to Haley Westenra. Next time on Violent Profiles, I have one more video from Season 0 to remake. You guys have been clamoring for it, telling me I can put it back on the channel, or go to hell. If that sounds too exciting to wait a month for, or you just want to support the channel and keep those videos a-rolling, head over to the Patreon and subscribe at the $5 tier. For the price of a Terry Bogard DLC, your name earns a spotlight among the high scores currently on screen, and I can continue to indulge my corn chip addiction. Until then, white out.